In the winter of 69 BCE, in the vibrant city of Alexandria, Cleopatra VII, Thea Philopator, was born into a dynasty that had ruled Egypt for nearly 300 years. Alexandria was no ordinary city. It was the cultural heart of the Mediterranean world, home to the legendary Great Library, the towering Pharaoh's lighthouse, bustling marketplaces, and palaces adorned with marble and gold. For Cleopatra, it was both a cradle of opportunity and a stage for immense danger. She was a descendant of Ptolemy I, one of Alexander the Great's generals, whose heirs ruled Egypt after his death. Unlike the native pharaohs of the past, the Ptolemies were of Macedonian Greek descent, outsiders who had adopted Egyptian customs to legitimize their rule. They styled themselves as divine monarchs, often associating with Egyptian gods like Isis. But their court was riddled with betrayal, ambition, and bloodshed. Siblings married siblings, and conspiracies brewed within palace walls as naturally as the Nile's annual flood. Cleopatra was born into this world of wealth and peril, the daughter of Ptolemy the Auletes, a ruler often criticized for his dependence on Rome and his lavish spending. Her father's reign left Egypt politically unstable and financially weakened, its fate increasingly entangled with the rising power of Rome. Within the palace, rivalries simmered between Cleopatra, her sisters, and her brothers, each a potential claimant to the throne. From the moment of her birth, survival meant more than royal privilege. It demanded intellect, adaptability, and courage. Unlike many of her predecessors, Cleopatra immersed herself in learning. She studied philosophy, mathematics, and astronomy, and, uniquely among her dynasty, she mastered the Egyptian language in addition to Greek. These skills, rare in her lineage, would later allow her to command not just soldiers and politicians, but also the hearts of her people. When Ptolemy I, known as Auletes, died in 51 BCE, his kingdom was already fragile. Egypt was still one of the wealthiest lands in the ancient world, but its independence was slipping away, entangled in the ambitions of Rome. The Ptolemies had long relied on Roman generals and senators to secure their rule, offering bribes and tributes in exchange for protection. In return, Rome viewed Egypt as both a jewel to be controlled and a pawn in its endless civil wars. Into this precarious world stepped his 18-year-old daughter, Cleopatra VII. By her father's will, Cleopatra was named co-ruler alongside her younger brother, Ptolemy III, who was only around 10 years old at the time. It was tradition for Ptolemaic siblings to marry and rule together, but in reality, power was always contested. In the gilded corridors of Alexandria's palace, factions quickly formed. Advisors and generals surrounded the boy king, whispering that his sister was too ambitious, too independent, and too clever to be trusted. Cleopatra, however, had no intention of being a ceremonial figurehead. She immediately set out to rule in her own right, issuing decrees in her name alone, even placing her image and signature on official documents. This boldness alarmed her brother's guardians. Within 2 years, tensions escalated into open conflict. In 49 BCE, Cleopatra was forced to flee Alexandria, stripped of her throne by palace conspirators loyal to Ptolemy III. Many rulers before her might have accepted exile, but Cleopatra was not one to surrender. She retreated east to assemble support, raising an army from mercenaries and allies in Syria. Her determination was clear. She would return, reclaim her throne, and prove herself the true ruler of Egypt. Her opportunity came through a twist of fate that linked her destiny to Rome forever. In 48 BCE, Julius Caesar, the most powerful man in Rome, arrived in Alexandria. He had pursued his rival, Pompey the Great, to Egypt during Rome's civil war. But when Caesar landed, he was met with shocking news. Ptolemy III's advisors had ordered Pompey's murder, presenting his severed head to Caesar as a gift. Instead of delight, Caesar felt disgust. To him, the act revealed weakness, treachery, and disrespect for Roman honor. In that moment, the fate of Egypt shifted. Cleopatra seized the chance. Knowing Caesar was both powerful and insulted by her brother's court, she devised a daring plan to meet him. Alexandria was hostile territory, filled with her enemies, so she had to act with secrecy and cunning. According to legend, She arranged to be smuggled into Caesar's private chambers, wrapped inside a carpet, or perhaps a linen sack, carried by a loyal servant. When the bundle was unrolled before the Roman general, Cleopatra emerged not as a supplicant, but as a queen of charisma and intelligence. She spoke to Caesar with bold confidence, presenting herself as the rightful ruler of Egypt, a partner worthy of alliance, not pity. The gamble worked. Caesar, fascinated by her courage, intelligence, and beauty, chose to back Cleopatra's claim. He summoned Ptolemy III to negotiate, but the boy king's advisors resisted. Tensions exploded into open war, the Alexandrian War. For months, Caesar and Cleopatra's forces fought against Ptolemy's army within the streets of Alexandria. The conflict was brutal, with fires breaking out in the city, one of which damaged the great library itself. Through it all, Cleopatra proved more than a pawn. She maneuvered politically, supplied Caesar's forces, and displayed a resolve that astonished even hardened Roman commanders. Eventually, Caesar's legions triumphed. Ptolemy III attempted to flee, but drowned in the Nile during the retreat, leaving Cleopatra victorious. With her enemies defeated, Cleopatra was restored to the throne, though Roman custom required appearances be maintained. To appease tradition, she married her younger brother, Ptolemy XIV, though their union was symbolic and loveless. In reality, she now ruled with the strength of Roman support and her own unshakable authority. Cleopatra's return was not just a personal victory, it was a turning point in Egypt's history. No longer a vulnerable exile, she had transformed into a ruler who had outwitted her enemies and secured the backing of the most powerful empire in the Mediterranean. Her throne was safe, but her future would be forever tied to Rome and to the man who had made her restoration possible. With her throne restored through Caesar's intervention, Cleopatra's reign entered a new phase, one defined by her bold partnership with the most powerful man in Rome. The victory over her brother's faction had cost Egypt dearly in lives and resources, but Cleopatra had emerged triumphant. Now, her task was to secure her dynasty's future in a world increasingly dominated by Roman ambitions. Julius Caesar lingered in Egypt after the Alexandrian War, officially to stabilize the kingdom, but in truth his presence became deeply entwined with Cleopatra's own. Their relationship was political at its core, yet it blossomed into something more personal. Cleopatra, only 21 years old, recognized that Caesar's influence could shield her from both internal threats and external enemies. Caesar, for his part, was captivated by Cleopatra's intelligence, her eloquence, and her ability to charm not through subservience, but through wit and confidence. Unlike many queens, she did not bow. She negotiated, positioning herself as an equal. In 47 BCE, Cleopatra gave birth to a son, Ptolemy XIII, better known by his nickname, Caesarion, Little Caesar. To Cleopatra, this child was more than her heir. He was a living link to Rome's most powerful figure, a symbol that her dynasty might not only survive, but also thrive alongside the Roman Republic. While Caesar never formally acknowledged Caesarion as his son, Cleopatra promoted the boy's lineage, declaring him heir to both Egypt and Rome. It was a bold statement, one that hinted at ambitions far greater than simple survival. During this time, Cleopatra and Caesar enjoyed a period of relative peace and prosperity along the Nile. Cleopatra accompanied Caesar on a voyage upriver, showcasing Egypt's riches, the fertile floodplains, grand temples, and ancient traditions stretching back millennia. For Caesar, who ruled over a republic constantly torn by war, Egypt seemed almost timeless, a place of wonder. For Cleopatra, the journey was a chance to reinforce her legitimacy, presenting herself not just as a Ptolemaic monarch, but as the living embodiment of Isis, the goddess of motherhood and kingship. But the realities of Roman politics soon pulled Caesar back to Italy. In 46 BCE, Cleopatra followed him to Rome, bringing Caesarion and her younger brother husband Ptolemy XIII. Her arrival caused a sensation. To the Romans, Cleopatra was exotic, a queen who carried herself with regal poise and foreign mystique. She resided in one of Caesar's villas across the Tiber River, where she became a visible and controversial figure in Roman society. Many senators despised her presence. To them, Cleopatra represented the dangerous influence of the East, luxury, decadence, and threats to Roman tradition. Rumors swirled that Caesar intended to crown himself king with Cleopatra at his side, or even move the capital of Rome to Alexandria. Whether true or not, her presence sharpened political tensions in an already volatile republic. Yet Caesar did honor her publicly. He commissioned statues of Cleopatra as Isis, a bold act that placed her within Rome's sacred spaces. He also granted her official recognition as Egypt's queen, ensuring her position remained secure. Cleopatra, in turn, maneuvered skillfully within the Roman elite, cultivating allies while ensuring that Egypt's independence was preserved. This glittering chapter ended abruptly in 44 BCE. On the Ides of March, Julius Caesar was assassinated by senators who feared his growing power. Cleopatra, residing in Rome at the time, suddenly found herself in peril. Without Caesar's protection, her position became precarious. Roman politics descended into chaos, and her enemies might easily have turned on her. Acting swiftly, she fled the city, returning to Alexandria with Caesarion. Back in Egypt, she consolidated power once more. Ptolemy XIII soon died, likely poisoned on Cleopatra's orders, leaving her free to declare Caesarion as co-ruler. By doing so, she not only eliminated a rival, but also placed Caesar's son beside her on the throne, reinforcing the claim that her dynasty was bound by blood to Rome's greatest leader. But Rome was far from finished with Egypt. Caesar's death had left a power vacuum, and new figures would soon rise to dominance. Chief among them was Mark Antony, Caesar's loyal general, who would become both Cleopatra's next great ally and her final, tragic love. The death of Julius Caesar in 44 BCE left Cleopatra in a precarious position. She had lost her most powerful protector, and Rome was descending into turmoil as rival factions battled for control. For Egypt's queen, survival meant once again weaving her destiny into the fate of Rome. The struggle for Caesar's legacy narrowed to two men: Octavian, Caesar's adopted son and heir, and Mark Antony, his trusted general and longtime ally. It was Antony who would come to dominate Cleopatra's life, binding their fortunes together in both triumph and tragedy. In 41 BCE, Cleopatra received an invitation from Antony to meet him in the city of Tarsus, in Asia Minor. He was consolidating power in the east and needed Egypt's wealth and resources to fund his campaigns. For Cleopatra, the meeting was more than diplomacy. It was an opportunity to secure Egypt's independence and to shape the balance of power in the Mediterranean. She did not arrive timidly. Sailing up the Cydnus River, she appeared on a magnificent golden barge, its sails dyed purple, its oars of silver, while she herself reclined beneath a canopy, dressed as the goddess Isis. Perfumes filled the air, musicians played, and attendants fanned her with peacock feathers. Antony, known for his love of spectacle, was captivated at once. What followed was both alliance and seduction. Cleopatra entertained Antony lavishly, hosting feasts where no expense was spared. Yet beneath the luxury was strategy. Cleopatra understood Antony's ambitions and offered what he craved: Egypt's immense wealth, food supplies, and naval power. Antony, in return, granted her political favors, confirming her rule over Egypt and granting territories once lost to the Ptolemies. Their partnership was cemented by passion as much as politics, and before long, they became lovers. Over the next decade, their relationship deepened. Cleopatra bore Antony 3 children: Alexander Helios, Cleopatra Selene, and Ptolemy Philadelphus. Together, they envisioned a dynasty that could rival Rome itself, with Egypt at its center. Antony saw in Cleopatra not just a queen, but a partner who shared his dream of ruling the East. In Alexandria, they formed a glittering court, a blend of Greek, Egyptian, and Roman traditions, where feasts, games, and rituals proclaimed their power. Antony even allowed himself to be portrayed alongside Cleopatra as Dionysus to her Isis, gods ruling together over a new age. But in Rome, their union provoked outrage. Octavian seized on the relationship, portraying Antony as a man corrupted by a foreign queen, bewitched by luxury and desire. Roman propaganda painted Cleopatra as a dangerous temptress who sought to dominate Rome through Antony. These accusations were not mere gossip. They were weapons in a war for public opinion, and Octavian wielded them skillfully. The tension between Octavian and Antony reached its peak in 34 BCE during the donations of Alexandria. In a grand ceremony, Antony and Cleopatra distributed eastern territories to their children, publicly declaring Caesarion as the legitimate heir of Julius Caesar. This was a direct challenge to Octavian, who claimed that role for himself as Caesar's adopted son. To Rome, Antony's actions looked like betrayal. To Cleopatra, it was the realization of her boldest vision: a new empire, blending Egyptian tradition with Roman power, ruled by her bloodline. Inevitably, war followed. Octavian declared that Cleopatra was the true enemy of Rome, using her foreignness as the rallying cry. In 31 BCE, their forces met in the waters off Actium, on the western coast of Greece. Cleopatra and Antony commanded a vast fleet, but Octavian's admiral, Agrippa, proved superior in tactics and discipline. The battle dragged on for hours under the burning sun, until Cleopatra made a sudden retreat with her ships. Accounts differ as to why. Perhaps it was a calculated maneuver, perhaps panic. But Antony abandoned the fight to follow her, leaving their fleet in disarray. Octavian emerged victorious, and Antony's reputation never recovered. After Actium, Antony and Cleopatra retreated to Alexandria, their power crumbling. Still, they did not surrender. For nearly a year they prepared for Octavian's inevitable invasion, but their forces dwindled, and allies deserted them. The once mighty dream of an Eastern empire collapsed under the weight of Rome's resolve. For Antony, the final blow came in 30 BCE, when false news reached him that Cleopatra was dead. Stricken with despair, he fell on his own sword. Mortally wounded, he was carried to Cleopatra, who was still alive and died in her arms. The year 30 BCE marked the twilight of Cleopatra's reign and the end of Egypt's independence. After the crushing defeat at Actium, Cleopatra and Antony withdrew to Alexandria. Once the proud capital of learning and luxury, the city now braced for siege. The queen who had dazzled Caesar and Antony, who had envisioned an empire spanning east and west, now found herself cornered by Octavian, the future Augustus, Rome's first emperor. In Alexandria, Cleopatra fought to preserve what remained of her power. She fortified the city, stockpiled resources, and attempted desperate negotiations with Octavian. Her goal was clear: to save her children, particularly Caesarion, whom she still hoped to establish as a ruler. But Octavian was cold and calculating. He wanted Egypt's wealth, its fertile lands, and its symbolic prestige. For him, Cleopatra was not a monarch to bargain with, but a prize to display in his triumph. Antony, broken in spirit after Actium, oscillated between bursts of defiance and deep despair. His Roman allies deserted him, and his legions, once loyal, surrendered to Octavian. In the summer of 30 BCE, Octavian's forces advanced on Alexandria. Antony led one final, hopeless defense, but defeat was inevitable. On hearing a false report that Cleopatra had taken her own life, Antony fell on his sword. Mortally wounded, he was carried to Cleopatra's mausoleum, where he died in her arms. With Antony's death, Cleopatra was left to face Rome alone. Octavian entered Alexandria soon after, victorious and unchallenged. For Cleopatra, capture meant humiliation. Roman tradition dictated that conquered rulers were paraded through the streets of Rome as trophies, shackled and mocked before being executed. For a queen who had styled herself as the goddess Isis, who had lived as a sovereign in her own right, such a fate was intolerable. Her end was tragic, but her life ensured her immortality. Cleopatra was the last pharaoh of Egypt, the final link in a chain of rulers stretching back thousands of years to the dawn of the pyramids. Through her courage and ambition, she etched her name into history not as a victim of Rome, but as one of the most unforgettable figures of the ancient world. Cleopatra's story is more than the tale of a queen. It is the story of resilience, ambition, and the unyielding will to shape one's destiny against impossible odds. She stood at the crossroads of empires, facing betrayal, love, and war, yet she refused to live as anything less than sovereign. Though her life ended in tragedy, her legacy endures as one of history's most captivating rulers, a woman who defied the greatest empire of her age and ensured her name would echo through the centuries. If her journey has inspired you, remember that history is filled with extraordinary lives like hers, stories of courage, sacrifice, and brilliance that continue to shape our world today. Join us as we bring more of these timeless tales to life. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel, so you never miss the next story of the legends who changed history forever.